Welcome to this webinar, everyone, and thank you for joining the session on responsive adaptation in a time of crisis as part of the PWYP Africa Conference 2021. We will just wait a few more minutes to allow everyone to join the session. As we wait for people to join, I just wanted to welcome everyone again and take a moment for everyone to familiarize yourself with the ground rules. As this webinar is provided with simultaneous interpretation, everyone should select a language room. You can see the interpretation world icon at the bottom of your screen. So please select English, French, or Portuguese, and simultaneous interpretation will be provided. Please chat directly to the host. That will be PWYP Secretariat if you have any technical difficulties. And feel free also to use the chat page. You'll have to select all panelists and attendees to introduce yourself. Later on, we'll have a Q&A section. Please use that section to ask your questions to the panelists. If someone has asked a question that you're interested to hear answered, then please vote for it using the thumbs up icon. By participating in this webinar, you are agreeing to uphold the code of conduct, which is being shared now in the chat. We'll send the links in English and French. Finally, please note that this webinar will be recorded and the link will be made available shortly after. I will pass it on now to Victoria Ibezim-Oehi, who will be moderating this session. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, Africa. Whether you're joining in from West Africa like me, or from Southern Africa, or East, or North, or Central Africa, or from any part of the world, I warmly welcome all of you to the opening panel of the Publish What You Pay Africa Conference. The last time we all converged in Dakar, Senegal, and now to a virtual gathering of mind and hearts, no thanks to COVID-19. So this is the first time the conference is taking place in a virtual setting. And I'm pleased to see so many participants are able to join us today from Africa and from around the world. So in my local language, I say to all of you, Ndewonu. Ndewonu simply means welcome. So my name is Victoria Ibezim-Oehi. I'm the Executive Director of Spaces for Change, and I'm a member of the board of Publish What You Pay. Just prior to this panel, we have been hearing from Claude Kademba about some of the challenges that COVID-19 pandemic has presented to governments and communities in the context of extractive sector governance. This panel is an opportunity for us to explore in a bit more detail with 5 fantastic speakers who have done tremendous work in the continent around extractive sector governance. Together with them, we will be exploring certain questions that affect natural resources and extractive resource management in the time of COVID-19. Some of the issues we'll be looking at we'll be looking into questions like the adaptations that we're seeing around the continent, opportunities that can be leveraged on to meet some of the challenges we are seeing now and in the coming years. We will be drawing on the findings of a workshop by Publish What You Pay last year to explore the impact of 4 COVID-19 scenarios on the governance of the extractive sector, with particular reflections on the implications for civic space, on energy transition, on women's rights and gender equality and tax justice. So the workshop report is being shared right now in the chat. The chat boxes, you can click on the links to look at the fuller discussions. But that is why this panel is drawing from the experiences of experts that have been working around these thematic issues in the continent. So participants, join me to warmly welcome and introduce our 5 speakers. Let me begin with Chenai Mukumba. Chenai Mukumba is a policy research and Advocacy Manager at Task Justice Network Africa. Task Justice Network Africa is a membership organization with 32 members in 22 countries spread around the continent. It is coordinated through its secretariat domiciled in Nairobi, Kenya. Hello, Chennai.
Hi, how are you?
Good, welcome.
Thank you.
I also welcome Aidan Iyakuze. Aidan is the Executive Director of PWYP East Africa, and he is the incoming Civil Society Chair of the Open Government Partnership. So for those of you that don't know the meaning of PWYP, it means we can make it happen, is in Swahili. Welcome, Aidan.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Aidan. It's my pleasure to also welcome Lorraine Chipunda. Lorraine is the coordinator of the Africa Code Network. Hello, Lorraine.
Hi, Victoria. Thank you for inviting me into your space.
So, and also joining Leran is Memory. Memory Kachambua is Executive Director of FEMNET. FEMNET is African Women's Development and Communication Network, and she'll be joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Hello, Memory.
Hi, Victoria. I'm so excited to be in this space today.
Thank you. Welcome, Memory. And also we have in our midst Dr. Solomon Deso, who is currently the chair of the Extractive Industries Working Group at the Africa Commission on Human and People's Rights. Good morning or good afternoon, Dr. Deso.
Good morning to you in West Africa. Good afternoon for me here in East Africa. Thank you. Good to be here.
Good, good. Welcome, panelists. We'll just dive straight into the questions. Maybe Solomon, I just start with you. Looking at the workshop conversations that I referenced a while ago, one of the risks of the pandemic, which the report highlighted, is that we may see a decreasing responsiveness from governments to citizens and civil society's demand for transparency, participation, and accountability. So from your perspective at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, is this a concern that resonates strongly with the African Commission as an institution? And while doing that, please tell us a bit about the work of the African Commission on Extractive Industries Working Group, and how the Commission is working to ensure that governments are upholding the values that they have signed up to via the African Charter, the African Mining Vision, and what are able to do when they're done.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation extended to us at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. As Victoria mentioned, my name is Solomon Ayele Derso, currently the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. This is the premier human rights body of the African Union. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights, as a treaty body, is organized to function in such a way that members of the Commission, 11 of which elected by the heads of state and government of the African Union, but functioning on the basis of their expertise and personal capacities, take responsibility for following human rights issues in states parties to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So each of us, the 11 members of the Commission, are assigned around 5 or so states parties to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. The African Charter, as you may know, is the treaty establishing the African human rights system. It is ratified. It's actually one of the near universally ratified legal instruments of the African Union. The only country that's we are awaiting to get ratification from is Morocco, who, as you all know, rejoined the Union only recently. I think it's worth mentioning that the African Charter, as the oldest human rights treaty, will mark its 40th anniversary this year, 2021. And wish to also mention to all of you that perhaps it's one of the few international human rights instruments which contains specific references to the right of peoples to their natural resources. Article 21 of the African Charter. It specifically addresses the question of the natural resource governance as a question of rights of peoples in Africa. And it's worth mentioning that of all the provisions of the African Charter on human and people's rights, this is the most detailed and extensive article of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, with 5 sub-provisions within it, addressing a wide range of issues that relate to natural resources and the rights of people in relation to natural resources. This is one of the aspects of the African human rights system that is not adequately known, that's not optimally utilized by civil society actors, community members, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that the African Commission tries to do as part of not just country responsibilities of individual members of the Commission, but also as on thematic issues, is establish specific mechanisms to deal with specific thematic issues. So one of those mechanisms established to deal with thematic issues relating to extractive industries, environment, and human rights is the working group that I chair, the working group of the African Commission on extractive industries, environment, and human rights in Africa. Now, within the framework of the working group, we have done some important work that I wish to bring to the attention of all participants today. The first has to do with the normative elaboration. And this has to do with, for example, if you check the website of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, one of the most important resolutions has to do with Resolution 367. I will quickly share a copy of that resolution for ease of access to all of you. This is a resolution that tries to address what I call the human rights protection vacuum in the extractive industries sector. The extractive industries sector, for historical reasons, has been operating as if human rights obligations do not apply to the extractive industry sector. That certain contracts and legal instruments are the only source of reference in terms of the governance of the extractive industries sector. As a result, it operated in a human rights protection vacuum, leading to some of the most serious violations of human rights, including destruction of environment, the health of people, and including, of course, their livelihoods. I think the most emblematic example of this, in respect of which the African Commission on Human and People's Rights received cases filed by communities, relates to events that happened in Ogoniland in Nigeria. We have the famous case of Serak versus Nigeria, that the African Commission actually adopted a decision on, finding series of violations of human rights, not only as they relate to the collective rights of the Ogoni people in terms of benefiting from the extraction of oil from their land and protection from the spillovers and the various environmental disasters, but also importantly, it is a landmark case that established the intersection between what we call first generation rights, civil and political rights, second generation rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, and third generation rights, so-called collective rights, so-called third generation rights, collective rights of peoples. So basically, in the destruction of the environment and the unregulated extraction of natural resources, leading not to the betterment of the living conditions of affected people, but the actually further loss of their existing well-being, as a result of the destruction that is caused to their natural environment on which they depend for their livelihoods, for their housing, for their health. So series of violations of rights having been established by the African Commission on the basis of that communication. Drawing from that, the Commission, of course, also adopted in 2018. I will share both of these documents with all of you so that you make good use of these important resources. I think it's one of the unknown rich resources of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, from which I think many would definitely benefit. So it adopted state report guidelines and principles on Articles 21 and 24 of the African Charter. And these instruments cover a number of issues, including the financial regulation of the extractive industry sector and the physical obligations that apply both to governments and states parties to the African Charter, but also those operating in the extractive industry sector, including to address issues relating to illicit financial flows, issues relating to transparency, which is the core of the discussion during the course of this session. And you will find detailed, specific requirements from the moment of negotiating the terms of licensing agreements all the way to the effective administration of fiscal regulations relating to the extractive industry sectors as it applies both to the state in terms of the state reporting to the public, but also to institutions such as parliament or local council, to the availability of judicial accountability and other forms of accountability. So what we have is basically a plethora of comprehensive regulations which apply for governing this sector in relation to various aspects of rights relating to natural resources and environment, but also the fiscal aspect of responsibilities. So as the cases of the Commission show, the Commission, of course, would make a finding when it receives complaints based on a judicial process that violations have happened, and in respect of which it requires, among other things, that those violations are remedied, but also the regulatory framework and the gaps in the regulatory framework are also rectified in order to ensure that that kind of incident doesn't happen again. Now, let me quickly say a couple of points on the first aspect of your question. You know, expectations in terms of whether or not states would comply with demands for transparency. Now, one of the things that COVID-19 has demonstrated, and this is an area that the African Commission has spoken very forcefully in the course of this pandemic, is that governance matters. Governance is at the core of what we have observed in the course of this pandemic. First, from a governance perspective, whether or not and what priorities do governments put in respect of, for example, investing in economic, social, and cultural rights, particularly the right to health, becomes a core governance issue because it's governments who decide what investment to go where. And the lack of attention to this sector has left the whole of Africa, nearly the whole of Africa, exposed to the vagaries of this pandemic. because our health systems are not only not well prepared, but also have for years been neglected, with policies of the global financial system and economic system increasingly pushing for what I call the commodification of economic, social, and cultural rights, thereby undermining investment in these areas which are at the core of governance. Similarly, you can find a lot of other areas. I mean, the upshot of what I'm saying is this one. What COVID-19 shows us is that we actually leave governance to governments at our own peril. That governance affects us directly. And this pandemic demonstrated beyond doubt that each and every one of us are exposed to peril if our governance system is bad. So my expectation is that this message has to be conveyed to governments. It's not just civil society actors, human rights activists, but all sectors of society need, I'm sure by now, to recognize and demand of governments to comply with and abide by and indeed follow the requirements of good governance, respect for and protection and promotion of human and people's rights. Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you so much, Dr. Solomon. That lots of teasers and impulses, from your comment. And I particularly like your emphasis on governance, saying that governance matters. And you left a strong message. You said we leave governments at our own peril. I think drawing from that, I will move over to Chennai to look, reflecting on what you have just said. Again, linking it back to Publish What You Pay's future scenario exercise, which concluded that debts will be rising for governments worldwide as they struggle with reduced tax revenues. And at the same time, we may be seeing multinational companies holding more and more power. So tell us a bit about what you're doing at Tax Justice Network and what changes you are seeing within the extractive space on the continent as a result of the pandemic. Is it a race to the bottom on tax?
Great, thanks so much, Victoria. And thanks again to Publish What You Pay for inviting us to sit on this panel. We're always excited to collaborate with yourselves. So I think in response to your question, Victoria, let me take a step back and tell you a bit about us at Tax Justice Network Africa. Essentially, what we are committed to doing in terms of our mission is promoting and advocating for progressive tax systems. And then, of course, on the other end of things, seeing equitable expenditure, right? So that we also see equity in the way that the revenues that are mobilized is fair. In terms of what we're seeing, though, with regard to the COVID pandemic, unfortunately, I mean, you asked me the question about race to the bottom. This is something that we are seeing a trend. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're trying to promote progressive tax systems, right, what we're trying to do is have those who earn the most pay the most, right? And largely this is corporate sectors primarily. What we want to see is corporates paying their fair share. But with the advent of the COVID pandemic, what we saw was a flurry of an increase in tax incentives and tax exemptions towards these corporates, right? In an effort to, ease the enabling environment for them. In contrast to, measures that weren't, I would say, equal in terms of trying to support primarily the average person who was being negatively affected by this, right? And so for us, one of the things that we advocate for as Tax Justice Network Africa is that corporates need to pay their fair share. So what we saw, right, by the reduction in incentives and exemptions was essentially them reducing the amount of money that they're contributing to the national treasury, the national purse, right? And so for us, I think that's one thing that we saw, that the pandemic promoting, and to an extent, one could say that that was, in essence, a race to the bottom, because different countries were, of course, using different approaches to, to make the situation better for corporates.
Yeah. So, but where do you see the specific pressure points? Where you mentioned that taxes and increased tax exemptions from companies, were on the decline. So what are the other very specific pressure points when it comes to oversight of the fiscal decisions related to extractive by governments at the moment? Maybe you can give us also examples where civil society is leveraging some opportunities created by the pandemic to call for fiscal reforms.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit difficult, right? Because I think, take a look at our meeting now. It's virtual, right? So the normal way of us engaging as civil society has had to change, right? And so the things that we've done, for example, as not just Tax Justice Network Africa, but I think civil society across the world, is started to engage in digital advocacy, right? And so that's been one tool that civil societies across the board have been implementing in order to place pressure, right, on their governments. And so that for me speaks to, the process. But in terms of the actual content, in terms of what are the pressure points, I think one of the things that we agree very much with Publish What You Pay, and this is something that they have a campaign on, right, is the need to disclose contracts and deals and engagements, right, that governments are having with companies, right? Because unfortunately, in some of these countries, what we saw is certain companies were actually having one-on-one conversations with governments, right, in terms of the kind of incentives and exemptions that they felt they needed. And, we can't operate in systems like that. And so that opaqueness, right, is something that we need to do away with. We need to start to have much more transparency, I mean, in terms of the way in which, sorry, I can see that I'm speaking a bit fast. We need to have much more transparency in terms of citizens being able to see, civil societies being able to see the engagements that mining companies, but and other extractive sector companies are having with their governments. I think that for me would be a very key specific pressure point. And then in terms of responding to your second question, right? Can we give you certain examples of work that we've been doing, particularly now during COVID? A couple of weeks ago, we worked very closely with our colleagues at Southern African Resource Watch. I was glad to see Claude speaking earlier, because in Zimbabwe, what we saw was that there was a mining company that recently had received, incentives from the government. And the concern from local civil society, I mean, I talk about SADWA, but also at the local level, we worked very closely with Zela, was how can we be giving such exemptions, to a mining company at a time when, we are in so much need of resources, right? At a national level, we don't have enough resources for our health situation, and from an economic perspective, so many lives are being damaged. And so what we were able to do in collaboration with these institutions was have a virtual meeting like this, where we were able to engage and discuss on these issues, share ideas. We had some legal minds that were on that platform, and then put together a statement that we shared widely, but also with the government of Zimbabwe themselves, just indicating that we can't be going out with a begging bowl, right, to so many of these institutions, whilst ourselves we're letting our potential for domestic resource mobilization be done away with. And so that's an example of some work that we've been doing on the continent with some of our local partners.
Great. If I just one related question, you mentioned digital advocacy. I think that really stirred my interest.
Yeah.
How would you rate the effectiveness of digital advocacy, whether it is conversations on fiscal transparency between citizens and their government, and between government and extractive companies, or even the trial of citizens, governments, and extractive companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think for many of us, I wouldn't say all, because there are certain civil societies that have been in this space for a while. For many of us, we're doing a lot of trial and error, right, to see what works and what doesn't work. But I think within the digital advocacy space, what we found is particularly if you're able to partner with different institutions, right, in order to build a critical mass, a significant amount of voices all saying the same thing, you will gain the attention of political leaders because you tend to find that they are also on these platforms. And so I think one of the strategies that we've been employing as civil society is, for example, before we engage in digital advocacy, have meetings where we think through the way in which we want to do, the way in which we want to do this, the hashtags we want to have, who we want to tag, so to speak, so that, you know, we have a number of people in our creating momentum, right, within the digital space on a specific issue. So like I said, I think for many of us, we're still, you know, finding our way through this. But I think given the current context, it really is something that a tool that I think as civil society, we need to try and exploit.
Thank you so much, Chenan. Thank you very much. I move over to you, Aidan. Aidan, having listened to Deso and Chenan, both emphasize the importance of citizen engagement in advocating for transparency, for accountability, for fiscal reforms generally. And I saw that interesting comment where you mentioned that Tanzanians, individuals, and have taking petitions to the African Commission and they've secured some rulings. I think that resonates strongly with Publish What You Pay's future scenario exercise that highlighted the fact that COVID-19 is creating new shocks on the civic space. In some countries, we are witnessing contractions, significant amount of contractions of inequality and also on the spaces for engagement are increasingly shrinking. So please tell us a bit more about your work at PWYP and open government partnership to address this trend, the trend of shrinking civic space. What would you say are the particular challenges facing activists in the extractive sector who continue to put difficult questions to their governments, either to challenge or demand a great role in decision making?
Thank you so much, Victoria. And it's great coming after Solomon and Chennai, because I think they've really hit a couple of things right on the head, and I'll come to them in a moment. But before I do that, allow me to be a bit domestic and give a shout out to my colleague, Semkai Kilonzo, who is a social accountability champion in Tanzania. Hi, Sem. I'm sure you'll ask a question. Let me start by introducing open government and the OGP, where I am involved on the steering committee and will be the incoming co-chair from October 2021 to 2022. I want you to imagine a little bit technology.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So let me ask you to imagine the technologies that have really driven human civilization over thousands of years. Writing allowed us to build massive communities and coordinate them. Steam, manufacturing, moving heavy equipment, electricity, digital technology, quantum computing is coming up next. What are all of these? What do they have in common? They're called general purpose technologies. They can be used in all kinds of contexts for all kinds of things. Open government, in my view, humbly, is a general purpose social technology as well. It is for me a way to upgrade and energize democracy and democratic governance. So it is all about making things transparent, making things governance inclusive, participatory, and then making sure that governments are accountable to the citizens in whose interest they work, rather than work in their own interests. So OGP provides a whole range of advice, ideas, and mechanisms for making government more transparent. Why is it general purpose? Because you can use it in the Publish What You Pay sphere of extractive governance. You can use it in anti-corruption. You can use it in beneficial ownership, transparency for companies. You use it in expanding civic space. The main thing here is to bring government and citizens closer together, better coordination in a systematic, structured way in order to yield positive results. And I think this all when you hear about the African Commission for People and Human Rights, Publish What You Pay, Transparency International, a whole bunch of civil society and government organizations, I think one of their main core aim is exactly that, to make government more transparent and accountable to citizens. And so that's why now, coming to the point about what Publish What You Pay is doing, I am so super excited about what they have done with this particular report, the stress testing of a strategic plan using the Deloitte global scenarios. Why do I think this is so important? Because I'm a scenario building enthusiast and a user. And it is an incredible way of anticipating what could happen in the future and making plans now for those reactions so that you're not caught by surprise, and therefore you're able to be much more resilient about responding to the negative pressures that come, or even the positive opportunities that are opened up here. And I think Publish What You Pay is to be congratulated for this kind of anticipatory governance. I didn't make that up; it actually exists as a concept, anticipatory governance. And I first heard it from somebody who used to work in the George Bush Jr.'s government in the security. You know, he was a deputy national security advisor, and they used this kind of thinking to be able to anticipate threats to the U.S. security. We need to be able to use the same kind of intellectual technologies to anticipate and prepare ourselves for the threats and the opportunities that come from a changing global context. So let me address a little bit the context, I think, as you've mentioned it, the fact that governments are likely to be much less transparent, inequality has been exacerbated. First of all, it's been exposed for all to see in very dramatic fashion, and I think it's also been deepened. So two things have happened. People now see the inequality between countries, within countries. Right? That has become massively obvious, and you can see inequality making global news headlines now all over the place. So I think that's one opportunity for us to jump onto that or amplify that message and really get government and private sector organizations to focus on that. And the other one, of course, is deepening that inequality. What I found, and I want to, again, because you asked us to refer to the report itself, I thought, looking at the lone wolf scenario, the worst one, what I really was struck by and really impressed by in terms of Publish What You Pay's thinking was that they saw an opportunity in this quasi-apocalyptic scenario. And that opportunity is written the following: despite the apocalyptic nature of this scenario, and indeed because of it, it presents a clear opportunity for maintaining and doubling down on Publish What You Pay's raison d'etre, rationale. And I completely agree. Now is the time when the world needs good ideas. Now is the time when the world needs solutions. Now is the time when the world needs mobilization, legitimacy and a trust which has been lost by many governments for the reasons that Solomon mentioned. People were not prioritizing health. We have got this shock to the health system. We are falling down on making sure that people survive or thrive through this pandemic. We are falling down on making sure people have livelihoods to fall back on. We're falling down on just basic human rights, enforcing lockdowns in a way that is more dangerous than the COVID pandemic itself. We're falling down on these things. And a place where it's an opportunity for Publish What You Pay and other civil organizations is in thinking through the solutions, equitable, inclusive, and that hold governments to account, in mobilizing citizens in order for them to be able to respond to the challenge or the opportunity, and to legitimizing, where governments are willing to work with civil society, to legitimizing their approaches to dealing with the pandemic. So really, I think it's a great thing that Publish What You Pay has seen this as an opportunity. Please don't forget that. The other thing that I noticed is the threat, where it says open government may be challenging, it already is, making it harder and less relevant to focus on extractive industry transparency. And I think that's a great recognition. I actually think it is beholden upon us as civil society organizations to think beyond our sectors and, to put it bluntly, our silos. I think OGP, Publish What You Pay, Transparency International, Amnesty International, and others, we need to think much more expansively about this particular moment in history. We need to collaborate better. And that's a threat again that your report really puts a finger on. Then we will see tension amongst the civil society community, domestically and globally, between a focus on governance, some people will call this soft theoretical stuff, and social and economic outcomes and rights, which are sort of the hard bread and butter issues. I don't think there's a tension between these things. It is upon us to really look at how we can make these things to resonate, synergize with each other, and to be able to move forward in providing some solutions. I'll end with a little bit of what Weather is trying to do and what we've learned in dealing with governments which are shutting down, in closing civic space. We basically have tried to deploy a 4-point tactical agenda. Number one, we're trying to work much more hyper-locally. And I know resource extraction is actually a very hyper-local activity. Yes, with macro implication, but it happens in a location, right? So one needs to work much better in that location in terms of understanding and empowering citizens to be able to engage with the government, local government there, with the investor, the extractor, the value extractor, etc. So work hyper-locally, that helps citizens really engage with the issues at that particular moment. Second strategy is working cleverly with reformers inside government. And they are always there. Government is not monolithic. They will be silent, but they will seek you out quietly and say, I need you help on this, or here you may not want to do that approach, try this approach in order to advance your agenda. They're always there. We need to find those people and work with them and support them. Third one, which I think you can really use some of the scenario work with, is to challenge the official narrative. Part of the reason, Chennai, why companies are getting tax breaks is because they tell a better story. You know, they say, we need to maintain these jobs. We need to maintain your fiscal, whatever it is. Really? We need to be able to tell really good stories as well about the importance of promoting and protecting human dignity, human livelihoods, and this. We need to be much better storytellers. I think, you know, compelling analysis, great storytelling in order to mobilize people around the issues that we care about. And finally, the fourth one that we're doing is to really build up and out a new coalition of pro-democracy, pro-openness generation. We cannot assume that, you know, ancient us with gray hair coming out of our heads will be able to carry on this fight. We will get tired. We need to get people who look, feel, and are passionate like Greta Thunberg in our own countries, in our own communities, to come on board and to move forward. So I hope those give us some ideas as to moving forward. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Aidan. It said a lot of things that were so very exciting issues and points you've raised. I particularly like where you emphasized the importance of working hyper-locally. You know, that's for me, that really resonated strongly with me. We can work hyper-locally, maybe still making a global impact, but it comes with some consequences. Apart from the scenario shocks and stresses, you know, in that report, we find across jurisdictions increasing clampdown on actually working hyper-locally. So well, I'm just trying
Victoria, sorry, you'd gone a bit faint. We couldn't hear you.
Okay, some of the activists working hyper-locally.
Victoria, we can't hear you. If I may also take the opportunity, if I may also take the opportunity to say, with sincere apologies, please allow me to leave you now. As I indicated, I couldn't be able to stay with you, but I thank you very much for your invitation and the kind attention. It was really great to listen to Chennai and Aidan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Can you hear me better now?
No, we can't hear you, Victoria.
But I'm trying to switch to my headset. Is it better?
Slightly.
It's a little better, yeah.
Hello. Okay, so can I continue?
Yes, that's
great.
Good.
Great. So I was coming back to the conversation around working hyperlocally comes with its sudden consequences and risk. Increasingly across jurisdictions, a lot of activists are facing crackdowns and restrictions by their governments. What are you seeing some of these trends in Tanzania, and how are activists pushing back? Demanding for transparency and accountability for many activists is quite an uphill struggle, because it requires you bringing out information, exposing things that companies are doing behind the scenes that are hurting the local economy, and that can put people in some kind of trouble. Are there certain examples you could share? And there's also, if possible, we can make reference to the petitions that some individuals from Tanzania have taken to the African Commission on Secure some rulings.
Okay. Now, on the second part of your question, the petitions were more, I think, around some constitutional matters in Tanzania, which hit some roadblocks in the domestic courts. But we're able to get favorable ruling at the African Court for Peoples and Human Rights. So it was interesting to see the escalation of some domestic issues that go up to a regional court for resolution. And this was a great example of citizens really taking their domestic issues and escalating all the way up until they get resolution. Unfortunately, the previous president's administration then saw it fit to pull us out of specific elements of the treaty or the charter, if I'm not mistaken, that then stops citizens from taking the state party to the treaty to the African court. We hope we'll be able to resolve that in the coming days. But to your, I think, broader point about what has happened to activists who have tried to challenge and to ask difficult questions. Well, several have been seriously harassed, imprisoned, charged with charges that don't have are unbailable offenses. And this is more broad than just extractive industry issues. And the government has tried to silence them. And by the way, this is not just the government of the previous president, even going back to, I think, 20 or 30 years around mining, there was similar challenges with the Mkapa administration, when a group of lawyers were raising questions around the treatment of artisanal miners around a gold mine in west central Tanzania. There is a price to pay, as you well know, Victoria. But I think the thing that is important to keep in mind is a couple of strategies. One is sometimes you need to be able to make those noises outside of your own country. So it is important for things like, for people, for organizations as PWYP to be able to make that noise from outside the country, and to use the global press in important ways to pressure the investor, usually listed on some stock exchange, about what's going on in the country, right? And that will help raise the issue. Secondly, is to have a really good, strong legal strategy and people who will help you navigate the legal thickets of your own domestic space in order to promote the agenda that you're promoting. I think it's not enough to be right or to be passionate about these things. We need some very smart legal strategies around making our case going forward. Not only to defend the human rights defenders or the people who are making the noise, but also to address the substantive issue that is being raised, whether it's mistreatment of artisanal miners, whether it is the structure of the agreement between the company and the government in terms of its revenue, of fiscal implications. We need smart people inside our context as they have in the investment banks and in the governments which are dealing with investment banks. I think those two things ought to help.
Thank you, Aidan. We'll move over quickly to Lauren. Lauren, the last speakers have talked so much about the some of the new changes we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, particularly the shift towards a low carbon future since the start of the pandemic because of the temporary reduction in global oil demand and commodity price slump. So Publish What to Pay is also looking to position itself strategically on the energy transition. So can you tell us a bit about the Africa Coal Network, the types of changes you're advocating for now, and how?
Thank you very much, Victoria. So I'll start by explaining who we are. So the Africa Core Network is a collective of various organizations that created a platform that connects and strengthens various African struggles, particularly those that are fighting and pushing back on coal and also on other fossil fuels that are regarded as the alternative to coal. So we work at a local level, at a national level, and we also connect at the regional level and also input into the global village. So our work, we've got membership from 19 African countries that either have got coal projects or that are facing the threat of having coal projects. And our work also stems from 5 thematic areas. So these 5 thematic areas form the basis of 5 working groups, whereby different groups and organizations from various countries can participate from. So these are pushing back or following the finance. So the finance working group focuses on tracking energy finance in general and also pushes back on dirty energy financing. And we're trying also to guide how energy projects are financed in Africa with regards to the model and the nature of the finance. We also focused on pushing and advancing for a just transition towards renewable energy. And we're also focused again, so these are 2 separate working groups, the Just Transition Working Group and the Renewable Energy Working Group. And also because of the nature of our work, which is pushing back on money, capital, pushing back on government's decisions, it means we're also affected by issues to do with human rights defenders and also closing of democratic spaces. So which means that we also have got that working group where we constantly support the various human rights defenders, environmental rights defenders who face the threat of, going against the massive impacts of energy projects. And also we work to support various coal struggles in Africa. We've got a campaigns thematic area and working group, which strengthens the resistance of coal struggles across the continent. So over the years, we've seen how models of doing business have resulted in the climate emergency that we're in. We've seen how businesses put profits ahead of people and the environment. And because of the COVID pandemic, we've seen that this has actually worsened and made various people that are affected by energy projects on the continent. So these models of doing business also include energy projects. We've had massive energy projects that have caused local impacts to various communities across the continent. And also because of the climate emergency that we are in. So some might argue that Africa has not contributed much in terms of global greenhouse gases, but we are saying that if we continue to build on that path, if we continue to develop a path whereby we're constantly investing in fossil fuels, it means we're going to end up contributing much towards global gas emissions. And also the localized impacts of the projects also force us to say we are demanding a transition towards cleaner energy, towards sustainable energy. So again, our struggle is also with the type of energy model that has been existing in Africa for the past decades or century. So the energy model that we have in Africa places businesses ahead, business needs, business energy needs, or people living in urban areas, it places their needs ahead of the other population. You find that nearly 800 million people in Africa don't have access to energy. So this means that the energy system is definitely not working for Africa because it means that the main grid energy, the type of energy, is not reaching out to all those marginalized groups, whether it's groups in rural areas, groups in unregistered settlements, and also other marginalized areas where communities and various people stay. So that is also our other fight, that in fighting for renewable energy, because of the localized impacts, because of the climate crisis that we are in, we are also fighting for renewable energy because renewable energy can be deployed locally, it can be deployed off-grid, it can make sure that all those other sectors of society, all those groups that are marginalized, that are affected by the lack of access to energy, are able to also access energy through localized and through decentralization of energy systems. So that is also our other fight, to make sure that those 600 million groups that don't have energy also have their energy met. And also this also includes the struggle with women. We have to make sure that we are working to make sure that women who are also further burdened because of patriarchy, they're further burdened in terms of lack of energy access. If women don't have energy to access, it triples their burden, especially considering the household duties that women are said to be responsible of. So we are working to make sure that we bring out feminist voices with regards to access to energy. We bring out the voices of communities, of localized groups that are affected by dirty energy projects, that are affected by lack of access to energy model. So our struggle, as I mentioned, is also about systematic changes. The systematic changes are the ones that I talked about, that focus on making sure that we deploy energy differently this time. So other than the main grid, we want to make sure that energy is localized. People have got access to energy systems through deployment. Even it can be through municipalities, through district councils, or through various institutions that local people can have access to. And when people have got local access to energy institutions, it means that they're able even to demand accountability, because energy is not centralized, whether it's centralized in capital systems, centralized in other localities where people don't have access to. So where energy where energy systems or energy grids are available locally, people are even able to, like I said, demand accountability, demand in terms of understanding how energy used, and even can control how that energy is used. So that is part of the work that we are doing. So as you know, that renewable energy is being deployed at a very fast rate, but still in Africa, we have got other various challenges that we might be faced with, which include access to energy finance. We also have to consider that we have seen various energy transition happening in Europe. There's Germany. They've set up a very, a nice system of moving from coal to renewable energy, or from other fossil fuels to renewable energy. But it's because they do have access to capital, and most of the African countries don't have access to that energy. So also then it then speaks to the model of energy that you are fighting for, because it will reduce the burden of debt on governments. When governments have to transition to renewable energy, it means it will reduce that burden of trying to access loans, of borrowing money, in order to make sure that our energy needs are met, and to also cater to the transition that you are fighting for. So basically, this is who we are, and this is how we are working, and this is how we're trying to usher in a new era, especially as we try to build back better. We're fighting to make sure that we don't build back dirty. So this is our work. Pro people policies, pro people institutions, and also fighting to make sure that we've got an open democracy, whereby there are democratic spaces through which people can engage in, through which people can make their contributions and engage in deliberative discussions. Thank you very much, Victoria. For now, I'll leave it here and wait for other questions.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm going to come back to you on this issue because Africa, of course, many countries like Nigeria is a fossil fuel. We have operates fossil fuel dependent economy. I know many other African countries heavily reliant on fossil fuel as well. Find this conversation very interesting. I'm going to come back to it shortly. Memory, one of the recommendations from published What You Pay Future Scenario Planning is for civil society to build stronger alliances across social justice movement. I think Aidan also emphasized this point together with Solomon. And I understand that you've recently included extractive industries in your organizational strategy. Please, can we learn more about how FemNet works and how you are engaged on extractive issues? What are the particular issues that COVID pandemic has exacerbated or made more obvious in relation to women's rights and extractive sector governance? Hello, Memory.
Thank you so much, Victoria. You were breaking a bit, but let me just start by also thanking Publish What You Pay for allowing us to be in this space. As Femnet, in our new strategy for 10 years, we have prioritized women's economic justice, among other climate justice as well. And among that, what we are saying is we want to make sure that we advance a feminist analysis. We always say as feminists, we feel that the feminist theory and ideology, unlike other theories, actually went further. You know, most of them were left at the door, but when we use the feminist ideology, like Lorraine spoke about, we're really looking at systems change, and we are also saying we have to look at the power analysis and the power dynamics. So our engagement is also connecting struggles. Most of our work is really on disrupting issues around neo-colonialism, issues of capitalism, you know, imperialism, militarism, all the isms. And we actually feel that the extractive industry and transparency is one sector where in some instances, we have not had very strong feminist voices, feminist analysis, or gender analysis. By training, I did a bit of geology back then, and one of the things that I always used to wonder is when you go into the field, you find a lot of women artisanal mining, you know, doing the gold panning, being exposed, servicing, you know, they are involved in very menial jobs when it comes to the value chain around extractive industry. So our work really has to also, like what Aidan said, to also start shifting narrative. And when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to inclusion, we want to make sure that the voice of African feminists, the voice of African women's rights organizations and activists are also prominent within the extractive sector in terms of also influencing the mining vision, the charter, the gender charter on extractives, and also other policies as well. So we are in this sector as within our strategy, like you mentioned, Victoria, but also we also recognize that according to World Bank, there are over 41 million people in artisanal and small scale mining globally, and at least 30% of those are women. And here in Kenya, the extractive sector has a total of 15.9 million in wage employment, and of those, only 2.6 are women. When you look at countries like DRC, its mineral wealth is estimated to be $24 trillion US, which is an equal GDP equivalent to Europe and the United States combined. I mean, when you really look at DRC boasts the world's largest cobalt reserves and the 3 key minerals, that's tungsten, tin, and coltan. And these are used in the production of laptops, mobile phones, and vast diamonds deposits on top of other mineral deposits. In my country of origin, Zimbabwe, we have surface diamonds, which are worth more, but we have a 90% unemployment rate, and 50% of the 90% unemployed are women as well. So despite all these vast mineral deposits, for example, in DRC, is still considered to be one of the countries with the poorest citizens on earth. The country has been ranked among the most underdeveloped countries on the planet, with almost 88% of the population living on less than $1.25 US a day. So this really shows that the issues around within Africa, we've also seen Africa is also said to have one of the highest number of women who are participating in artisanal mining activities. So it should be noted that when women participate in mostly artisanal mining, like I mentioned, they can do this directly. primarily through engagement in mining operations or indirectly in terms of servicing mine sites, working as cooks, as mining operators, and even as nightclub entertainers. I mean, what you find is that there's a lot of transactional sex work that happens within the mining sector and the mining districts within the extractives industry. You hardly find women take in the leadership positions where negotiations are being made around the mining sector, where deals are being struck with investors around mining. And you still see huge gaps when it comes to conducting impact and social assessments, which really look at the impact of the effect of the communities, and particularly the women who are within those communities as well. So I think for us is to say, when the women's realities are not really considered and prioritized in the extractive sector, it's a promotion of abuse and exclusion of marginalized women within this sector. And most of them are still participating as informal miners. And we know that most of them are also participating and without the protection of law. So we also, by being, as Femnet, what we are also saying is we need to forge alliances with transparency organizations as well, to say even their reports, issues around gender data should also give that lens that also speaks to the impact that the extractives industry is having on women, that is also having on children. And also to say we need an intersectional and transformative feminist natural resource agenda, which really centers the leadership of women and the realities that women in their communities face. Let me just also say, when we talk about how COVID has really exposed how the risk, a lot of increased risks, particularly of women who are already in the sector. We've seen that lack of services such as water and sanitation, healthcare, hospitals. These, when we sort of like look at how the resources and the base of those resources within the global budgets of countries are not able to provide that. There's a correlation there where most of the illicit flows that are coming out of the extractive industry could have gone much further in terms of making sure there are more hospitals, there are more schools, but also, okay, I'll try and slow down. But also some of those social, the social impacts, protection, lack of investment by our governments, which have really been exposed by COVID. But we've also seen that with COVID-19, there have been a lot of closed operations in the global mining sectors where employees are being laid off. And in most cases, it's the women who are first to be laid off because they're usually, their jobs are not considered important jobs. We've also seen an increase in gender-based violence in a sector where it's already violent for most women to be in. So there's violence in the public space, and there's also violence that we've also seen increasing even within the domestic sphere as well. So I think Femnet, we've been an ally with a Stop the Bleeding campaign, which is hosted by TGNA. I can see Chennai is left. But we also seek to popularize the illicit financial flows discourse and the effect of illicit financial flows in natural resource governance. We are also a co-lead in the Action Coalition of the Generation Equality Forum, which will be in Mexico next week, where we really are advocating for promoting the advancement of inclusive economies. So this includes advocating for inclusivity of women in working in informal sectors, such as those like artisanal mining, which are often excluded, and also calling for governments to act to foster a resilient job market and protect their communities' livelihoods. We are also part of the Gender Justice and Extractives Industry Working Group, along with PWYP UK, Oxfam America, National Resource Governance Institute, and Development Gateway and World Resources. And we've really, I think what as I just end is we also have what we call the 18 policy imperatives for activating feminist natural resource governance to herald a just transition. I'll just share it as well. So
Thank you, Memory. There are so many questions coming back to you. Already I can see some of them on the chat in the chat box. So you'll still have the chance to still share more information. I just wanted to take the opportunity to invite Harriet to share with us, share some poll questions that all participants can quickly complete. Over to you, Harriet. Harriet, can you display the polls? Yeah. Yeah, so this is a poll, is in French, is in English. Can we just quickly complete and submit? Can you all see it displayed on your screen?
There's a lot to read, so we might need to take some time. I can see that 3 people have answered so far.
How's it coming up, Harriet?
We're at 14.
So
a bit more time.
Yeah, so many questions.
Yeah, long questions, long answers. Would you like me to read them out?
Yeah. So how many do we have now?
We have 31 answers. I think Sandrina's just requested that I read the questions out loud, and then perhaps the translators can translate out loud as well. That might help.
That's fine.
So, in your experience, where has the COVID-19 pandemic had the most impact in the context of natural resource governance? And your options are entrenching restrictions on civic space, decreasing levels of transparency and accountability from government, decline in funding for civil society's work, increasing power of multinational extractive companies, highlighting the need for a just transition away from fossil fuels, socio-economic impact of mine closures on communities, and increase in illegal mining activities. And question 2, which area do you think Publish What You Pay in Africa should prioritize over the medium term, 5 years, in order to leverage post-pandemic opportunities to drive the Vision 2025 agenda. And your options are advocating for tax reform to ensure extractive revenue support economic development, exposing corruption and bad deals in the extractive sector, advocating for a just and equitable energy transition away from fossil fuels, protection of human/community rights and civic space for resource governance activists, building cross-movement collaborations with other social justice movements, for example, on tax, climate, and women's rights. That is all. We're now at 47. You're doing great, guys.
Maybe by the time we hit 60, which is about over half, then we can continue.
Great. We're at 58. Anyone else want to answer?
Very close.
Should we close it? We wait one more minute, one more, not long. We're not getting any more responses. I think end the poll there. Okay, oh, we got one more. Okay, I'm going to end it now.
Thank you.
Would you like me to share the results?
Of course, please.
Here we go.
So decline in funding for civil society work at 64% as one of the COVID-19 pandemic-induced challenges that society organizations are facing. Thank you, Harriet. I'm sure participants will get a chance to see more of the poll results in the reports of the this convening. Thank you very much.
Sure, I'll stop sharing now.
And there are lots of questions. I pray we have time to deal with all the numerous questions we have received. I'm going to start with you, Aidan. There is a question about digital. Mutsuso Diwilayo agreed that digital has worked and proved effective. I asked you this question because you described LGP as general purpose technology. And being objective purpose, he still recognizes that not everyone within the African landscape can access information through this media. What other ways and strategies could be effective, especially within the nation state with limited civic space?
First of all, I think, although it's starting from a low base, the rate of growth of access to smartphone and internet technology in across the continent is very fast, the fastest in the world. But that could just be a mathematical or an arithmetic artifact because we're starting from a relatively low base compared to other countries in the world. However, that said, the penetration is not small. It is quite significant. I think in Tanzania, if I get my numbers correct, more than 60% of Tanzania's population, probably adult population, has some kind of internet. 99% of it is on mobile, you know. So that's one. Let me on the internet as well. If you look at Google and the Loon project, if you look at Google, I can't remember what site it is. Google is putting up balloons, low Earth orbit balloons, that will make internet available to even more parts of the continent, which is far away from maybe the fiber optic cables and this kind of thing. So it's coming. Okay, if we're doing some anticipatory governance, more and more Africans on internet is coming. In fact, I remember I wrote a piece about 2 years ago, imagining Africa in 2079, in which it really is very driven by technology. Maybe I'll put it in the chat for people to amuse themselves with it. But if that is a challenge, our work as Twaweza in surveying East Africans, we always ask them, what media do you use most? What media do you trust most? They trust least the internet, okay? But they listen most to radio. Radio was supposed to have died, remember, with television and the internet and everything else like that. It has not died. It is alive and kicking on the African continent. So we can reach many, many people of every kind of social and economic complexion with radio. So let's use radio to inform people. Again, back to the issue of telling good, compelling stories. And people are now dashing onto the radio with podcasts. So this is radio you can consume at your own convenience, you know. So let's think about podcasts to help people understand, be informed, engage with what is going on.
Thank you, Aidan. Not a question for you, Memory. There's a question, maybe quickly, because we have just a few minutes left, about the impacts of COVID-19 on women and girls in the extractive industry. I think I heard when you talked about women being involved in all the menial stuff, including transactional style sex, in and around the mining, fields. Could you speak more to how COVID has exacerbated these trends? But we have a very small, short time left.
I'm actually glad that Lorraine is here, because that's some of the work that she's been doing. So as FemNet, we haven't done an impact study on the impact of COVID in the extractive sector, but that is something that we're also exploring together with some of our feminist activists within the sector. And we also have within also our allies. So this year we actually have, we'll be putting out a call to really look at the impact. And it's also interesting because we've seen a lot of impact studies of the impact of COVID-19 without actually seeing a lot around the impact, particularly on the EI sector. So this is something that we are also looking at. And so I'll be also happy to maybe share with this community as well once we have that out. And so in terms of the increase, in terms of issues, so the impact has really been devastating. I think with the shutdowns, just being able to access some of the stories that we hear, for example, access to contraceptives within the mining sector, within the extractive sector, has always been something which has been so difficult. So we've seen most of the women within the extractive sector, particularly artisanal mines, being left out of some of the public services already. And this has been exacerbated by COVID-19. So when you see even the stimulus packages and the policies that are being proposed, most of them do not even have the voice or the experiences or the realities. But I know Women in Law in Southern Africa have a study. I will just look for it, and then I can also share with Stephanie. Thank you.
Oh, please do share it in the link so that most of us can access it. And again, back to you, Lauren. She mentioned that you have done some study around the impact of COVID on women and girls working in the extractive space. Do you want to just quickly, very quickly, share with us some of the things you have seen, some of the results from your study?
Sorry, so it's not a study, but we've got a feminist circle of women working or fighting core. So I think she's mentioned a number of the issues that, firstly, women have been retrenched more because of the short-term contracts, which we find in many of the, mines, and also violence has generally increased, and also shrinking of local spaces through which communities where women that are affected by coal participate, and also health impacts and access to health facilities. So I think she's quite touched on most of the issues.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you to all the panelists. Unfortunately, Chennai and Dr. Solomon are not here. There are quite a lot of questions. Personally, I would have asked Solomon certain questions about enforcement of African Charter at the local level. But since they're not here, I want to really thank our panelists for their amazing conversations. I learned a lot of new words from all of you. I learned about general purpose technology. I learned about governance matters. I learned about the importance of women's rights in the extractive sector governance. I learned about renewable and what women are doing in promoting the transition to a low carbon future. All of these are some of the highlights that I picked up, and I know that there are so many other things many of you picked up that resonated very strongly with you. I thank all of you for joining in from across jurisdictions. Panelists, thank you for sharing your contributions. Participants, thank you for your contributions, your questions, and your answers you filled in the poll. So I'm going to hand over now to Sandrine to do some housekeeping and close the webinar.
Victoria, maybe before you go. Yeah. I've just put in the chat a link to that article I mentioned about African 2079.
Oh, yeah.
On our population growth, and also looking at the technology and the geopolitics as they might change in the next 40 or 50 years.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. I'm already on that link, and I hope I'm going to amuse myself and share with other people as well. So over to you, Sandrine.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to to show you the other sessions that are part of the Africa conference. There's one coming up soon after this one, starting at 1 p.m. GMT, which is on women's rights as resource governance priority. If you haven't done so yet, you can still register using our website, and we'll put the links now in the chat so that people can still register if they wish to do so. I'd also like for people to take a couple of minutes to respond to a survey, which will appear at the end of the webinar in English. So we'll put the links to the survey in French and Portuguese in the chat box as well, that people can click on. And thank you so much to dedicate a little bit of time to do that. That will help us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please do complete the survey at the end of the webinar. Good afternoon.
I will close the webinar now, and thank you so much to all our panelists. This has been a very interesting conversation. Thank you.